Hello, this is Danny Altamirano again, and welcome to my presentation on podcasting. During the presentation, we will be looking at different things like the definition of a podcast, the different elements that make a good podcast, the different stages involved in producing one, and finally, at the end of the presentation, I will give you some tips on how you can start producing your very own podcast. So hopefully, and this is my wish, I hope that by the end of the presentation, you feel very enthusiastic about podcasting and start thinking, brainstorming ideas on topics and things that you would like to present in podcasts. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that we need to know definitely is the definition of a podcast. What is a podcast? I found this interesting definition on the internet, Wikipedia to be precise. And Wikipedia says that a podcast is a type of digital media consisting of an episodic series of audio, radio, video, PDF, or EPUB files subscribed to and downloaded through web syndication or streamed online to a computer or mobile device. What Wikipedia is telling us is that we have to think of a podcast as if it were a radio program. A radio program in one that is usual and regular and broadcasts on a regular basis is made up of episodes. A podcast is really that. Yeah, it's basically an audio file with a particular topic, and these can be divided in different segments called episodes that are, of course, published on a regular basis. Some of these radio programs, some of these episodes can be enhanced. In other words, there can be elements that can be added to them, such as video, all right, such as PDF files, images, all right. These are, if it's a video, sometimes it's referred to as a podcast, all right. The short for video and podcast, all right. One other thing that we need to know, probably just as a quick reference, is what the word podcast is. Wikipedia, again, is helping us in the definition and tells us that the word is a neologism, which means a new word that is derived from broadcast and pod, from the success of the iPod, Apple's iPod. So it's a combination of the word, the elements in Apple, the iPod, and the idea of broadcasting. All right. So in the definition of a podcast, the terminology that we need to know basically is the first podcast, which is a series of episodes, all right? So again, think of a radio program, all right? And then an episode, all right? An episode is a single show. All right. Think about the radio program again, analogy. Think about listening to the radio program on Monday. All right. So what you listen to on Monday is a single show, and in podcast terminology, that is called an episode. Finally, a segment. A segment is a portion of an episode. That means a particular moment in the episode that you are listening to. Yeah, probably minute 2 or minute 5 in the episode, or minute 15, the beginning, the middle, or the end of the podcast. There are certain elements that make a good podcast. So we're going to go briefly through some of these. All right, one of the first ones is content. All right, when we refer to content, a good podcast should have a good topic, a topic that is interesting, that attracts an audience. It should also have a format. It's either audio, all right, or video, all right, and then it should have a slogan. In other words, a catchy phrase that the audience can always identify this podcast with. All right, there are some interesting podcasts available right now on iTunes and lots of other places on the internet that use interesting slogans. There's one, for example, on administrating your own business, which is something like "Help, my business sucks." All right, and there are, of course, language podcasts. All right, one of my favorite is Coffee Break Spanish and Coffee Break French and Coffee Break German. All right, so All of these have slogans or catchy phrases that attract the audience. The topic, the format, and the slogan are important elements in making a good podcast. Another thing that is important in considering a good podcast is the technical qualities. In other words, are you using audio? Are you using slides? Are you using video? All right. Another important thing is the volume. All right. Is the volume okay? Is the volume of your voice okay? Are you using music? Is the combination between volume and music appropriate? In other words, is your voice being drowned by the music, or does it keep a good level? Some very good podcasts also have written transcripts available. Now, these transcripts are good, especially if you are a language learner. All right. As teachers, we can use these transcripts to produce activities for you people. All right. But for you, when you are approaching a podcast on your own, it's a good way to look at the whole language that is used in a podcast, and maybe catch some of those phrases that were kind of difficult sometimes to listen to and understand when you are listening to the podcast, for the first time. Since a podcast is basically listening, of course you can have audio and slides, but it's basically listening. It is important that you consider that the length is also a good element, an important element to consider a good podcast. Podcasts are usually either 20 minutes or less. A little more than 20 minutes, like 30 minutes or an hour, can be very exhausting for the listeners, and they can start losing interest in your topic. So consider episodes that are attractive, really very enthusiastic, but there are no more than 20 minutes. Another important element that makes a good podcast is personality. In other words, not only the personality of the people speaking in the podcast, but also the whole thing. I mean, how the elements are combined and the information is arranged, and how you are taking the listener from the beginning to the middle to the end of the podcast. All right, the whole thing, the music, all the visuals, all right, they create a certain personality in the podcast. So you should consider making this as attractive as possible. A good podcast should have a smooth flow. In other words, you as a listener should be taken through different stages. The introduction, the content or the main idea of the episode, and finally the end, the summary. All right. So by moving smoothly, slowly through these stages, the audience will understand the idea that you are trying to convey. Another thing that is important to consider is the ease of location and the legal use of resources. In other words, for the listeners, it has to be easy to find your podcast. It could not be hidden in the internet, in the invisible internet. It should be easy to locate either by Google or iTunes or any other type of way of locating the podcast. And of course, when you're producing one, it is important to observe the rules of copyright. It's not like you can use music simply because you like it and upload it. Nowadays, there are regulations, stricter regulations on the use of video and audio. So if you are publishing this on a continuous basis, you should probably take a look at the regulations on copyright and observe them. Let's now take a look at the different stages involved in making a podcast. Namely, there are 4 stages. The pre-production, the recording, the post-production, and the publishing. Let's go and see each one of these. In the pre-production, here you do all the work that is previous, all right? All the thinking, the brainstorming, the ideas, and here you probably want to have a consistent format, all right? Not like one episode is different from another. You also are thinking about the proper name for the podcast, and of course you are either preparing an outline, like what you're going to say, the different stages of your information, or scripting, which means to have the real words that you're going to be saying on the microphone. Not many people use a script, although it's a very good idea and the safest way. But you probably want to try some of this. Yeah, probably you want to try scripting first, and then as you get more confident, you probably just have an outline and say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is the introduction, and then we're going to define or explain or give examples or whatever. In the stage of recording, yeah, well, what can we say about this? Yeah, you're using technology, and you're using different types of devices to record it. Of course, you need microphones and stuff. All right, but what is important here is to remember that the volume of your voice and the background noise should not be in conflict. In other words, when you are speaking on the microphone, loud and clear, the music should not drown your voice. Yeah, so there should be it should be a combination, yeah, of music and voice. Of course, this is a little of trial and error, and you will learn from your mistakes. Yeah, but I assure you, it's fun, and you will get to it. The next stage, after you have recorded your podcast, is called post-production. In the post-production, really what you are doing is editing. In other words, you are adding music, you are adding sound effects, or maybe you are deleting, erasing unnecessary pauses or interruptions or stuff that you didn't like. Yeah, you also add artwork if you are using images or PDF files or video or whatever. Right? In other words, you're making your recording beautiful, yeah, attractive. All right, this is a creative part, the post-production. The final stage in making a podcast is called publishing. Now, for publishing, you need three things. Yeah, you need, of course, your MP3 file, the one that you recorded. Yeah, the one that you edited. Yeah, you need a web page. Yeah, you need a web page in order to upload your MP3 file, and of course, you need something that is called a news feed. In other words, this is a resource that can help you place your podcast in directories where people can locate it. All right, so you need a combination of three. Definitely your MP3, definitely a place where to upload it, and definitely something that can help you and others find your podcast on the internet. This is a short presentation, and of course, there's a lot more to say, but if you would like to find further information about podcasting, I recommend this booklet online, this PDF. You can go to this link at the bottom, and here's interesting information and lots of other ideas. Finally, how can you make your own podcast? Well, definitely you need to record it. For that, I recommend Audacity, which is a program to record audio. And then a place to upload it, you can use Podomatic. Podomatic is a great place, easy to use, where you can upload your MP3, all right, and start sharing your podcast with the world. For these two, for the use of Audacity and Podomatic, I have prepared 2 tutorials in YouTube. All right, so if you would like to go to this link for Audacity or this link for Podomatic, you will find further instructions on how to download the program and how to use Podomatic, the website. All right, so you can start doing your first your first tests, your first trials on how to produce your podcast. And there you are. All right, it's not so complicated to produce a podcast. It's actually a lot of fun. All right, it requires some thinking and some use of technology, which I'm sure you love. All right, but in the end, I think the result is worth the work. All right, so thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Good luck in producing your podcast. See you.